The 1980s looked bright. Neon lights, arcade machines, big hair, loud music. But behind the glow, there was static. If you were a teenager in the 1980s, you grew up in a world that felt unstable. Not dramatically unstable, quietly unstable. The Cold War wasn't history, it was current. Under President Ronald Reagan, nuclear tension between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated again. Television showed missile tests, political speeches, words like arms race in schools. Students practiced nuclear drills. Imagine being 16 and rehearsing the end of the world. Psychologists later describe this atmosphere as ambient dread, a low, constant hum of anxiety, not loud enough to panic, but persistent enough to shape personality. When your future feels uncertain, you stop planning long term, you focus on now. And that shift changed teenage psychology. The 1980s also introduced something new, a mirror that never turned off. In 1981, MTV launched. For the first time, teenagers weren't just hearing music, they were watching it. Pop stars became visual identities, style became personality, image became currency. Teens compared themselves constantly, their clothes, their bodies, their attitude, their coolness. Self awareness intensified, and so did insecurity. The suburban teenager sitting on their bedroom floor was suddenly measuring themselves against global icons. This era quietly amplified performance-based identity. Who are you? Who do you look like? How do you present yourself? Teenagers have always searched for identity, but in the 80s, identity became aesthetic. At the same time, family structures were shifting. Divorce rates in America rose dramatically through the late 70s and early 80s. Many teenagers became what sociologists called latchkey kids. They came home to empty houses, made their own snacks, watched television alone, waited for parents working longer hours. Independence came early, but emotional supervision decreased. Without constant adult presence, teenagers formed stronger peer bonds. Friends became family. Music became therapy. Subcultures became safe havens. Punk, new wave, metal, hip hop. Each genre offered more than sound. It offered belonging. Because beneath the rebellion, there was confusion. The 1980s were also a decade of contradiction. Material success was glorified. Wall Street boomed. Consumer culture expanded. Teenagers absorbed that message. Achievement equals worth. Status equals identity. But emotionally, many felt disconnected. Mental health conversations were limited. Therapy carried stigma. Depression was often dismissed as moodiness. Boys were told to toughen up. Girls were told to stay likable. Emotional expression narrowed. And when emotions have nowhere to go, they leak out in other ways. Risk-taking increased. Teen drinking culture grew. Drug experimentation rose. Reckless driving, loud parties, confrontational fashion. Psychologists describe this as present-focused coping. If tomorrow feels fragile, today becomes intense. Louder music, faster cars, bigger reactions. It wasn't always rebellion for the sake of rebellion. Sometimes it was an attempt to feel something stronger than background anxiety. At the same time, media began portraying teenagers differently. Films centered adolescence as dramatic, meaningful, emotional. For the first time, teenage internal life was treated as cinematic. This validated feelings, but it also romanticized angst. Suddenly, being misunderstood felt iconic. There was power in alienation, but underneath the eyeliner and leather jackets, many teens were simply overwhelmed. They were navigating global political fear, rapid media expansion, changing family systems, rising consumer pressure, limited emotional vocabulary, and yet, from that pressure came resilience. Generation X, the teenagers of the 80s, developed independence early. They learned to self-soothe, to adapt, to observe quietly. They became skeptical of authority, cautious about promises, comfortable with uncertainty because uncertainty was their baseline. The psychology of 1980s teenagers wasn't just rebellion, it was adaptation. Adaptation to a world that felt visually exciting, but psychologically unstable. And here's the quiet truth. Many of those teenagers carried unprocessed anxiety into adulthood. They became parents who valued independence, workers who distrusted institutions, adults who sometimes struggle to name their emotions. The 1980s didn't just shape pop culture, they shaped nervous systems. So when we look back at neon nostalgia, the music, the fashion, the arcade glow, we should also remember the static underneath, the fear of nuclear headlines, the silence of empty houses, the pressure to perform identity, the absence of emotional language. Every generation believes their teenage years were intense, but the 1980s were uniquely contradictory, hopeful and afraid, connected and alone, expressive and emotionally restricted. And maybe that's why the decade still fascinates us, because behind the brightness, there was tension. Behind the confidence, there was doubt. And between every radio station, there was static. The teenagers of the 1980s learned to live with that noise. And in many ways, we still do.